If you're worried about your hormones, you're gonna wanna watch this. Hey everyone, I'm Abbey Sharp. Welcome to Abby's Kitchen. In today's video, we're going to be talking about endocrine disruptors in your diet and what you can do to help reduce your risk. A huge shout out to my colleague Erin Davis for assisting in today's research. Erin is a fellow RD and diabetes educator practicing from a weight-inclusive lens. So if you guys are struggling with your blood sugars, definitely reach out. She's amazing. I'm going to be leaving links to her contact below. And don't forget to hit on my description for my full disclaimer, plus links to my free downloadable Hunger Crushing Combo ebook and my LTK page if you're wondering what I'm wearing today. So I just realized that I read like a million research papers and government documents saying PFAS in my head when the actual pronunciation is PFAS. I know, so deceiving, right? Anyways, we're gonna hilariously dub it over for the rest of the video just for some and giggles. So let's set the record straight on endocrine disruptors in our food, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Endocrine disrupting chemicals, or EDCs, basically can change the body's function by mimicking, blocking, or interfering with the body's natural hormones. And this is not fake news, folks. This is a legitimate threat. So we mostly take in EDCs through what we eat, but we can also be exposed through inhalation and through the skin. Now, unlike most environmental toxins that we see a lot of wellness influencers harp about online, EDCs can build up in our fat tissue, so they end up having a pretty long half-life. In other words, they stick around and accumulate over time. Now, we're exposed to hundreds of different potential endocrine disruptors every single day. But some of the main ones that we hear about in the media are things like arsenic, bisphenol A or BPA, PFAS, and phthalates. Phthalates? Phthalates. You guys know what I'm talking about. It's the one with all the consonants all smushed together. That one. So what's the big concern with all these forever chemicals leaching into our foods? Well, research in this area is constantly emerging, but there is very likely enough evidence to warrant some concern and mindfulness in some of the products that we use or consume. So let's very quickly review some of the most concerning evidence to date. Number one, diabetes and metabolic disease. So research suggests that exposure to the forever chemical arsenic may impair glucose homeostasis and is linked to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. Number two, ADHD. So lots of really interesting emerging research when it comes to the diet and ADHD. I just shared a video about my own diagnosis right here, but some research suggests that phthalate exposure in adolescents may be associated with neurodivergency conditions like ADHD. And then there's fertility. So this is another one that's interesting to me because I am an IVF mom, but the research suggests that exposure to phthalates has been linked to decreased sperm counts, histological changes in testes, impaired ovarian function, reduced fertility, and pregnancy complications like miscarriage, prolonged pregnancy, and preterm labor. Also, we gotta talk about cancer. There's lots of talk about cancer. So this is again related to the infertility concerns, but exposure to phthalates may be associated with reproductive cancers in women. Some research also suggests that it may increase the onset and development of prostate cancer and breast cancer. Another one that I really didn't know much about until I started reading up on it is immunotoxicity in infants. As if new moms need another reason to be freaked out, but there is research to suggest that exposure to PFAS in breast milk may reduce the efficacy of some vaccines that are given to babies. And then of course, we can't talk about anything in the health world without talking about obesity. And this would be a huge topic that would likely require a dissertation to unpack. And I'm sure there's been many dissertations on this. I'm not going to do one myself, but a lot of EDCs like BPA, PCBs, and phthalates are considered to be obesogens. This review right here offers a really great in-depth look at the literature to date. But as an example, this study found that high exposure to BPAs in childhood was directly correlated correlated with childhood obesity, and there are a lot of other studies with similar findings. And honestly, the research is fascinating for a science geek like me, but there's a lot of data here, lots of correlations with different EDCs. So if you want to know more about that specifically, let me know in the comments below. So now I want to talk about some of the major sources of these EDCs in our diet. And I first want to start off by saying that I am in no way trying to fearmonger. I want you to know that it is next to impossible to avoid all EDCs in life. They're literally everywhere. So even if you were to never touch a piece of plastic again, foods are washed in water that has some level of contamination, and we're exposed beyond our diet in things like cleaning products, fabrics, cosmetics, nail polish, dental floss, and a lot more. So avoiding EDCs altogether should not be the goal. This has got to be a risk-benefit analysis. It's all about what small changes can we make to our lifestyle without making ourselves go insane. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight into some of those small manageable changes to help reduce exposure for you and your family. So first, let's talk about one of the most ubiquitous sources of EDCs, water. So tip number 1. Do not just stop drinking water. I just want to clear that up for the extremists in the back, because we all know that someone's going to assume that that's the solution. Bad idea. But anyways, EDCs can enter our water system through a variety of sources. So water disinfection byproducts, industry and livestock contamination, disposal site and landfill leakage, and therapeutic drugs that can be released into the sewage system. And while we don't have any really good nationwide sampling studies, independent sources have reported some PFAS in most tested samples of rain and tap water. Thankfully, the EPA recently updated their standards in March 2023 to work alongside Biden in his environmental justice plan to reduce PFAS levels in our water systems. And Canada is also working on our own water improvement strategy. So how can you limit your exposure while staying well hydrated? Well, first of all, it's never a bad idea to get your tap water tested for contaminants. If you're on a well water system, it's likely safer to be using bottled water, though bottled water is stored in plastic, which we will discuss also as a concern in a minute. But for most folks, your best bet is just to use like a high quality carbon filter to filter your water at the tap, and then to store that water in a stainless steel bottle, not in more plastic. Also, if you are using plastic water bottles, never put them into the dishwasher to reuse, and always store them in a cold, dark place, ideally in a fridge. If they heat up in your car, you gotta get rid of them. This coffee today is strong. What the did I put in here?
Coffee time!
Next, let's talk about a common food source, seafood. So fish and shellfish are actually one of the major food sources of PFAS in our diet. When the FDA tested 718 samples, all of fresh and processed foods, 97% of them were PFAS free, but of the samples that did test positive, 14 of them were seafood. And then when they specifically tested 81 samples of seafood, they found PFAS in 74% of those samples. So no different than mercury in fish, we see the greatest levels of these forever chemicals in filter feeders like clams, other mollusks like oysters, and also in larger fish who eat a lot of smaller fish.
Fish are friends, not food.
Because the contaminants can more easily accumulate. So when it comes to fish specifically, some studies have found higher levels in farm caught fish, others found higher levels in wild caught fish, and one study found higher levels in wild or farm, just depending on the fish. So that piece can be complicated. It's not so easy just to go with one or the other and know that's a better bet. But the good news is that with the exception of one canned clam product that was tested from China, none of the other products were found to be at levels likely to be at risk for human health. That said, I understand the desire to be prudent, especially if you are a heavy seafood eater or if you're serving fish to vulnerable populations like kids or pregnant folks. So my bottom line when it comes to fish is not to completely avoid it, because we know that having fish a few times a week is not only safe, but is hugely beneficial for your health. But to limit our exposure to some of these contaminants, number one, check out local advisories to determine what fish in your area may be safer or more at risk. Choose fish more often over things like mollusks or filter feeders, and go for smaller fish that are naturally lower on the food chain like light canned tuna, trout, salmon, and cod. Case in point, I'm making a little salmon snack for my lunch. Next, let's talk about canned foods. So we know that a lot of popular convenience foods are packaged in different types of plastics and other materials with varying concentrations of EDCs. And for decades, canned goods were lined with an epoxy resin based on bisphenol A. And then we later found out that those BPAs could migrate into the moist canned food. BPAs are no longer even allowed in any kind of baby products. And according to industry analysis, today about 90 to 95% of food cans are made without BPA linings. That said, a lot of experts are now kind of weary about products that are labeled as BPA free because they may potentially contain alternatives, including its sister compound BPS, which may carry similar risks. The research analyzing BPA alternatives like BPS has suggested that the swap really needs to be better assessed due to concerns that they too may affect the reproductive system. My take is I don't think we need to completely eliminate all canned foods. A lot of canned foods are a great, inexpensive source of nutrition. And like we said, the vast majority nowadays are BPA free. But I would say when you have the option, choose a jarred product or frozen or dried foods over canned whenever possible. And if you are buying canned, again, store them in a cold, dark place and check that the packaging is at least BPA free. Now, speaking of plastics, let's talk about storage containers. The 50s called, and it wants its Tupperware party back. But the good news is that as of 2010, the Tupperware brand, and I would imagine most of its competitors, are now completely BPA free. That said, as with the BPAs in cans, most of these products still contain other plastic compounds like BPS, which, as we established, may still be a concern. So the easiest solution here is to switch mostly to glass storage containers. I like that I can just put this straight into the microwave, which is definitely not advisable for anything that is plastic. They're also a lot more durable for long-term use. And if you do still want to use a plastic Tupperware for storage, just make sure to check the bottom. You can look for the recycling code and you'll want to avoid anything with a 7 or a 3. This one says 5. So I personally will just use the plastic for cold items like washed berries. And my little tip is to line the plastic with some paper towel to soak up the moisture, but also to create a little bit of an extra barrier, just to be extra prudent and safe. Moving on, let's talk fast food containers. Even if your favorite restaurant is claiming to use BPA-free materials and packaging, research suggests that people who order takeout food 4 to 7 times weekly may be ingesting between 12 and 203 pieces of microplastics through the containers, which increases the exposure to EDCs. We also know that the grease-absorbing papers found on a lot of fast foods are known sources of PFAS. So Consumer Reports actually tested 100 food wrappers at all these different popular fast food restaurants, and they found significant amounts in the packages from Arby's, Burger King, Chick-fil-A, McDonald's, even Sweetgreen. Boo! I love Sweetgreen. Don't love the price, but I love the salad. So good. So obviously the simplest solution here is to try to limit fast food consumption, which will have a lot of benefits well beyond limiting EDCs. And in my opinion, those benefits are much more important than the EDCs. But if you are a frequent fast food flyer, I would suggest choosing non-greasy items more often and consider picking up and bringing your own glass containers if they often serve their meals in plastic, which is gonna be way better for the environment as well. And if that's too extra for you to be that person, just transfer your food into glass or on a plate as soon as you can and never reheat the leftovers in the original packaging. Now, another food packaging example that I don't hear people talk about as much is microwave popcorn. So in movie style bag of popcorn, the bag is meant to keep all those buttery oils from soaking out. And like the grease repelling fast food papers we talked about, these are also known sources of PFAS. And in this case, not only is the popcorn sitting in that packaging, but then we're heating it up in the microwave, which can further exacerbate the transfer of those EDCs. So if you love popcorn as much as I do, I'm obsessed with popcorn. I don't think you guys understand my love for popcorn.
Sheriff, he's over here. God.
You can either try occasionally popping it on the stove, which is honestly so much fun. My kids and I do it all the time for and giggles. It is a great pastime. Great way to spend your Friday night, let me tell you. Or you can opt for like a pre-popped bag low-fat popcorn and then add your own butter when you're serving. Finally, let's talk nonstick cookware. We've been talking about the risk of Teflon in nonstick cookware since the early 2000s because Teflon is a known source of PFAS. And it's one that we happen to heat up pretty hot on the stove, which makes it the perfect vessel to transfer those forever chemicals into our food. So one type of PFAS in Teflon called PFOA, and I know this is getting confusing as but PFOAs were phased out of nonstick cookware production back in like 2002, but it's possible that a lot of the nonstick cookware still contains PFAS that may be damaging to our health, especially when overheated. The good news is there are a lot of cookware alternatives. So cast iron is really your best bet. It will last you a lifetime, but there's also a lot of cheaper options that are anodized or ceramic coated or carbon steel or stainless steel to help lower exposure to those EDCs. And if you are using a traditional nonstick, just try to replace it every few years and avoid overheating it, which can cause the pan surface to flake and then transfer those EDCs into your food. I get that this may feel like a little bit of doomsday. And I will admit that even I sometimes feel anxious when I think about all these potential sources of endocrine disruptors, especially because I have 2 kids that I'm trying to take care of. But again, I want you to remember that these compounds are everywhere. And the biggest risk is from cumulative exposure over time, not that one greasy McDonald's meal that you had last week. Also, manipulating your diet isn't the only way to reduce your exposure. Stain-resistant coatings on carpets, upholstery, and other fabrics, moisture-repellent clothing, personal care products, paints, and cleaning products are all other common sources. So my advice is to consider which of these sources are easiest to reduce or phase out without causing undue stress. If you need your microwave popcorn, don't worry about it. Like maybe replace your plastic containers with glass. If you rely on canned beans as a convenient, cheap source of protein, no problem. Just try to stop reheating your leftovers in the package that they came in. Try to make the choices that feel easiest to you because ultimately, stress is not good for our hormones either. And on that note, I gotta get this bad boy into the oven. That's all that I have for you guys today. If you like this video, be sure to give it the thumbs up. Leave me a comment below on what you're personally doing to reduce your exposure to EDCs. Check out my free Hunger Crushing Combo ebook, and I will see you next time on Abby's Kitchen. Bye.